just take a little journey with me to see a few verses, because these are incredible. Keep your finger here, don't lose it. Turn to Joshua chapter 4. It goes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua chapter 4. Do you remember Joshua and the Battle of Jericho when the walls came tumbling down? Why did God do all that? Well, he tells us. I mean, he could have done it simpler. He could have evaporated them. He could have melted them. He didn't have to have the people involved. He did it systematically for a very specific purpose. Look at Joshua 4 and verse 24. And these are verses I have marked in my Bible because they're so important. And what you'll find is, at every major event you can remember from the Old Testament, the big events, all of them have this verse nearby. Why? Because God doesn't do things purposelessly. He does them purposefully. And this is what he says in verse 24. This is why I'm going to knock down the walls of Jericho. Verse 24, that all the peoples of the earth may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty. Because God says, I want everybody to know. Verse 24, the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty. All the peoples of the earth may know God is mighty. He wants that in our lives. He wants us to show that. Turn to 1 Samuel with me, please. It goes Joshua, Judges, Ruth. 1 Samuel 17. This is a story everybody knows. David and what? Goliath. Yes. Look at 1 Samuel 17:46. And this is why, what's neat about this is, every one of these sites are so important that when you go to the Holy Land, you stand at every one of these sites. I'm going to mention. You stand there at Jericho and you see where God said, I want the whole world to know about me. You go down to the Valley of Elah and look at this is where David and Goliath had their matchup. And it starts in verse 45 of chapter 17. And David said to the Philistine, here's a 13-year-old, short, ruddy means red-headed, David, another smelly sheep herder, little boy, 13 years old. I can imagine a little chubby cheek, nice suntan, outdoorsman, and this big fat, pagan, 10 feet tall. And little boy, he's looking up. He says, you come to me with sword, with a spear, with a javelin. I mean, remember how long his spear was, like a weaver's shaft. I mean, we're talking about, this major tool of death and this gigantic sword and a spear on top of that. But I come to you, look at this, in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Did you know that David was the only one that saw what was going on that day? The only person. Do you know who should have fought Goliath? Saul. Saul was bigger than every other Jew. He was a whole head taller than everybody else. But he kept in his tent, so no one would notice that. He sent a 13-year-old boy out there, because the 13-year-old boy was the only person in Israel that understood what was going on. It was not the Philistines hurting the Jews, the Israelites. It was Satan empowering one group of people, idol-worshipping pagans, the Philistines, to defy God. And little David saw that. And he says, whom, look at the end of 45, you have defied. This day, the Lord, not me. I mean, it isn't that David was such a good shot. That is not, the idea of this story is not that you should go out and get a slingshot and practice all day long and wrestle with bears and lions. The message of the story is that God can use anyone if you will just allow him to use you as a tool in his hand. I mean, William Carey was not a magnificent man. He was just a tool in God's hand, and he learned all these languages, and he translated the Bible into all these difficult languages. Adoniram Judson was not anybody in particular. He was just a willing man. Hudson Taylor was not a very good doctor. He didn't know languages very well, but God supernaturally used him. All these people are just normal folks. What was abnormal about them was their obedience to God and their willingness for God. This day, the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you, and I will take your head from you, and this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth. Listen, here's what God wanted, that all the earth may know there's a God in Israel. That's why we pray for things here that we can't do ourselves in this church. We should always be asking God to do what we can't plan, what we can't orchestrate, what we can't figure out. and packaged slickly up, because we want God to do things that we can't, so that when He does them, who will get the credit? God. Not the committee, not the board, not the task force, but God. See, that's what prayer is all about, and that's what a life of faith is all about. So that's the reason why David was able to kill Goliath, was not because he was a good shot, but because he's the only one that was listening to God there, and it's wonderful.